I wanted to finish off this half of today's show by relating my recent experience at an Immokalee Water and Sewer District Board meeting. Again, I was invited by Jay Colhagen and Scott Kiley, and thanks for inviting me, guys. Now, I got to the meeting a little late, and I heard the end of an obstetrician's speech, followed by a dentist, and then myself. They both made some great points, and then I began my discussion. First off, I wanted to share with you the history of all of this. It goes back to the very early 1900s, right around 1905. There was this dentist straight out of dental school who moved out to Colorado. He was trained in the East. He moved out to Colorado, and he's in this community in the mountains or something like this. And very soon he notices that everyone out there, especially the kids, has this brown staining on their teeth. So obviously something's going on in the environment. Now the story came out that it was from the aluminum cookware. I guess people had just started using aluminum cookware at the time. Now Alcoa, who made this aluminum cookware, couldn't have that story getting out, so they sent some sort of advanced spectroscope over there and analyzed the environment, including the water. And what they recognized was the local water naturally had a very high concentration of sodium fluoride, 15 parts per million. And that sodium fluoride at that high concentration was doing this to the teeth and making these ugly round stains. So that gave fluoride a bad name. It already had a bad name because it was a main ingredient, for example, in rat poison. Time passes and cavity rates were going crazy in this country. People were starting to eat processed foods, sugars, and starches. And because of this abrupt and dramatic change to the diet with all this unhealthy cavity creating food, as you can imagine, cavities went through the roof. Now, people wanted to do things about this, obviously primarily the dental field. Now, the real solution to the problem is obviously the real solution to the problem. And the problem from the cavities was caused by the change in diet, the unhealthy diet, the processed food, the sugars, and the starches. So, of course, the real solution would be, hey, stop doing that. But again, no one's going to stop doing that. So they started looking at other options. And there was a dentist who looked back at data from that population with the brown teeth over in Colorado and recognized, hey, wait a minute, those people had the ugly brown stains from that high concentration of sodium fluoride, but they didn't have cavities. They had much lower cavity rates. So we got the idea, hey, maybe the fluoride's helping them. And he played with things. I'm going to cut to the chase. And it was determined that if you could get a concentration of maybe 1 part per million, you wouldn't have the brown teeth, and it would strengthen the teeth and reduce cavities. So that became the story, and it was pushed. Now, at the beginning, people fought against it because of the brown teeth and the rat poison. There were even people saying this is a big communist conspiracy. We're in the 1950s now. In fact, in the 1960s, if you remember that movie, Dr. Strangelove, there was a little scene in there where it was talked about a communist conspiracy of putting fluoride in the water. So the authorities and the dental industry, trying to do the right thing, really pushed fluoridating the water with sodium fluoride. But sodium fluoride was quite expensive for communities to do, so only a few communities around the country did it. That takes us to the 1960s. Now, at that time, Central Florida air was the worst quality air in the world because of the phosphate mining, and the fertilizer industry made some sort of fluoride gas, which made air pollution really bad there. So what they did is they somehow modified it and changed it so it became a liquid waste, not this gas that was expelled into the atmosphere. And this was fluorosalicylic acid. Now, again, this is toxic waste. It had lead in there. It had arsenic in there, but it had the term fluoro in there, fluorosalicylic acid. Obviously not the same thing at all as sodium fluoride. No evidence whatsoever it does anything for cavities in any way. It's toxic waste, but somehow these smarty pantses in that industry turned an expense of getting rid of this fluorosalicylic acid waste, industrial waste product, and they convinced communities across the country and government officials and the dental industry that, hey, this is fluorosalicylic acid. Again, not sodium fluoride. It's got a fluoro in there. Let's fluoridate the water. And they sold this toxic waste to communities to fluoridate the water, not with sodium fluoride, but with primarily fluorosalicylic acid. And they turned an expense, right, getting rid of toxic industrial waste, into a revenue stream, selling this toxic waste as a health product to communities. Now, that's quite brilliant of them, turning a big expense into a big revenue, but obviously it's quite evil of them as well. So putting aside whether or not sodium fluoride has any benefit to cavities, by the way, drinking has no benefit whatsoever. Does topical application, by the way, the dentist who spoke prior to me made some points that brings that into question. And there's no evidence that fluoridating the water has anything to do with cavity rates, because cavity rates are declining here at the same rate of the decline of other Western countries with similar demographics who don't fluoridate the water. So cavities are reducing, having nothing to do with fluoridating the water. Again, the point is, who cares about the sodium fluoride, which you could argue, I guess, this is fluorosalicylic acid. You can track increases in ADHD, in autism, in bladder cancer, in lung cancer in non-smokers. Is that due to the fluorosalicylic acid? Is that due to the arsenic or the lead? Who knows? This is toxic waste. It must be removed. We know things now we didn't know then. It has no benefit. There's only harm. It, by the way, has been declared in federal court to be a known neurotoxin. There's all kinds of evidence showing the harm, admitted in court, including if you have levels of greater than 0.7 units per million, parts per million. With pregnant women who drink it, their children are going to have reductions of IQ. So those were the main points in my presentation. I know I'm biased, but it's pretty open and shut. Now, what's interesting to me is what the response of the board was. And again, this is just my perspective of what was stated, but a vice chairman of the board brought up something like, well, why are you guys here talking about this fluoride stuff? You should be down in Naples talking about these forever chemicals. I completely agree with her that we need to do something about the forever chemicals, but we're actively putting fluoride in the water and they're involved. So if we want to clean up the water, why don't we start with, not end with, getting rid of the fluoride and not change the subject about something else and kick the can down the road? And then another individual brought up the fact that, well, our water's always below 0.7 parts per million, as if that's safe. Let me explain you something. If we know that 0.7 parts per million, when drunk by pregnant women for 9 months to their baby inside them, leads to neurotoxicity and IQ reduction, that doesn't mean 0.6 parts per million is safe. And people will drink this stuff not just for 9 months, but for their lifetime. So again, if 0.7 parts per million is when we know in pregnant women it leads to neurotoxicity, in the fetus, in the baby, leading to IQ reduction and who knows what else, again, that doesn't mean there's a safe level of 0.6 and, oh, we're all over it, we're just 0.6. I'll tell you though, I've been looking into, just from personal aspects, water quality for myself. Now, I don't drink the water, but I cook with it, I wash with it, and by the way, there's so much toxicity in the water, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to purchase a water filtration system for my house, and I would urge any of you out there who have the resources to do the same thing, and I'm going to change my pool from chlorine to salt water, and I would suggest anyone out there do the same thing as well. Because I saw something recently that blew my mind. There was an individual taking tap water, putting it into 2 clear plastic containers, taking one of these chloride droppers, putting it into one, it changes colors, demonstrating the chloride, and then he took his hand and forearm and dunked it in the other one for less than 30 seconds, took it out, and when he put the dropper, there was no evidence of chlorine. What does that mean? It was all sucked up into his body in those 20 to 30 seconds. So that's what happens when you swim in the pool, when you wash yourself, when you cook things, when you wash things. So again, I'm urging you, if you're able, get water filtration and change your pool from chlorine to salt water. And by the way, let's get rid of the fluoride, please. All right, we're going to take a break and come back with some more questions.